he started recording.
Yeah. Take it away, Tim.
Well, let's call the meeting to order. Marais Public Utilities Commission, October 7th. If the record show, George is not here. We have Mike Roth, City Administrator, Tom Nelson, Wastewater Treatment Facility Director, and David Berg, our consultant. First item on the agenda is our consent agenda. Any comments on the minutes, the agenda, or any of the payments? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I will second that. There's no discussion. Is there any discussion? I'll ask that. If there's no discussion, we'll do a vote, a roll call to approve the consent agenda. Ann?
Aye.
Myself, Tim? Aye. Motion passes. So we have our consent agenda approved. Next item on the agenda is the EMI water meter update. Tom had sent out an email on that. You want to give us a little additional?
Yeah, sure. We got all our initial order parts have came in. We got like 96 nodes, which is the transmitter, and a bunch of new heads for our existing Badger meters that tie together to make it work. I think we got about 4 in that Hayden's got on his computer that show up. It is a long, tedious process to try and get in people's homes to get some of this stuff done. But for now, I would like to just, with the 100 or 90 we got, just use our staff to work on it when we can until we figure out a good process if we want to go further and have help with it down the line. But for now, I still want to just kind of get it ourselves, get all the information, the components worked out so it's more streamlined so we can show someone how to do it. Like I said, the biggest part is going to be getting into people's homes and having those people clean out around their meters so we can get to the meters when we need to start, installing it. But the ones we put in, they have worked, right, Hayden, so far? You've got a few online?
He does.
So Tom, with that slow and cumbersome process, is that just the contacting the owners, making arrangements with them and making sure that the access to the meter is, readily available? Is that what's taking more time?
That is going to be the biggest hurdle, especially the contact during the day to get into somebody's home, because we have to go in all the homes to do this. And some of the meters are in areas that I could probably no longer fit into to get, in there. You got to send a small guy in and crawl, 30 feet in the crawl space in the dirt to get to the meter. So, those kind of things, we'll start with the easier ones first and, build up a routine. And, they have already built like a bucket when they go where they got all their components to do it. A lot of them are splicing together things and then trying to use that handheld programmer when you're on your stomach or your back in a crawl space. It's going to be tricky at times, but we'll work on what we can. And if we need help, we'll come and ask permission to get some help.
Of course, this was a project we were planning on doing quite a bit more of this year, and we knew it was going to be complicated to arrange entry into everybody's homes pre-COVID. Now the idea of somebody wanting an outsider to come into their basement and do some work for a while is that much more complicated. Plus the idea of taking our staff people and sending them into 500 different homes doesn't seem like it's worth the risk. So we're going to take it slow for a while and just try to get good at it and be ready to jump on it when it seems a little bit safer.
So what seems like a reasonable number of meters to expect, for installation, say through next year?
Well, what I think I heard you say is like the numbers, like right now we got 100 or so for residential. We probably got 700 residential or smaller meters with the hookup, and a total of like 300 or 750 counting big meters. The electric department doesn't have all theirs in yet. See, ours has to use the electric department's meters to work. Ours only pulses every so often, like once a day, because they're battery operated. So it takes sometimes 2 or 3 days to get to Hayden and City Hall with the signal. And so ours comes in, got a crawl spaces and basements. We can put the node outside if we have to, but we don't know how all that's going to work till we start, installing them in trickier places too. So
I think the closer answer to your question, Tim, is we don't know. And I don't think we're setting a goal for how many we want to get in. We bought 100. We'll work away at those for a while, and after maybe a couple of months of that, we'll have a better idea of how fast it's going.
Will we start trying to install those over the winter? Is that just as time is available to do those installations?
yeah, it is a time, but I think this winter, especially with the construction season over, it will allow us a little more time. The electric department, they help us. We've helped them put in some of theirs. So hopefully we can, when days allow, we'll work on the ones we know we can get at and just go from there and see what kind of troubles we have.
And did you have any other questions of Tom about the MI meters? Otherwise, he has some other items too.
No.
One project.
No, that sounds reasonable. I don't have any questions.
Well, I should continue on, Tom, with the Highway 61 then.
Well, right for the year, they're pretty much done, as you can see. We got all of our water and sewer infrastructure for this year done as per plan, with a little of adjustments here and there. Some of the difficulties we ran into, besides a little bit of the rock early on, was interference with other utilities on top of ours. It was mainly new stormwater basins were actually encroaching in a couple places, like on 8th Avenue West and 1st Avenue East, that are real close to our system, that will make it very difficult to repair our system if we have infrastructure breakage, close to those structures. And so we reiterated to the engineers as a group to, before next year, go back and try and look at all these crossings and conflict areas so we can get some of this stuff hopefully taken care of before next season starts, so we don't have some of these issues that could be potential long shutdowns down the road. It's like one example, if we have a force main break in the sewer line that comes up 8th that feeds from that big Park lift station, probably the only way we can repair it is do a directional boring from the bottom of the hill at 8th by the park and up, the middle of the block, and try and find the line and tie in, because it's just there's so much there in the way. Otherwise, you'd be removing 96-inch catch basins of storm sewer and stuff. So those kind of issues, hopefully we can mitigate some of those conflicts, and we pushed them on that to get going now on it.
Yeah, with the engineering that that was done for the project, was it known that was what you're going to encounter when you started?
Well, according to them, they do a conflict avoidance program of the utilities that overlap, but I think they need to better get a handle between the guy that does the water and sewer or the person who was doing the storm sewer, and they need to relook at it pretty close. If they have to get some new shots of elevations of different things, it's scary. A couple things they did, as far as long-term maintenance, if we have a problem.
I mean, the good news is we're replacing our infrastructure in the highway right away now too, so hopefully we won't have to worry about maintenance for quite some time. It's the water mains and force mains that we don't necessarily have completely accurate information about, and you can't go survey them. You have to dig them up to know exactly where they are. With the sanitary sewers, they can take elevations in the manholes and know pretty assuredly where the pipe is going to be between those manholes. With water mains, our as-builts may or may not be entirely accurate. So that's where the engineers say if there's a force main or a water main that is in close proximity to another planned utility, there's risk associated with that. Until we dig it up, we don't know for sure.
And so through to next year, then, are we anticipating that there are going to be any of these conflicts occurring in the projects for next year?
Well, that's what we pushed them to analyze a little more closely at these crossings. Hopefully, if there is a conflict, we can adjust the water or sewer lines a little bit, or they could adjust their storm sewer catch basins and piping a little bit so they don't have that. And that's what we instructed them to kind of look at a little bit.
I think when we hear back from the engineers on their second look, we'll know more about where they're perceiving the risk. The 3rd Avenue intersection has a lot of storm sewer that's going to be new in new locations. So I think that's one we'll want to look at pretty closely. Once we get east of 3rd Avenue, we're not really in the highway anymore with water and sewer lines unless we're crossing. So I think the risk goes down a bit. And then when we go west from there, most of that stuff, the catch basins are moving if the curb line moves, but the storm sewer is going to be in relatively similar locations. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, but we'll know more when the engineers get back to us with their second try risk analysis.
So with the work that was done this year, water and then any of the sanitary sewer, any impacts or anything to the treatment plant at all you noticed or been apparent?
No, not for this phase. It didn't really change the I&I, the sewer work, or the water distribution. What they did this year, those pipes weren't bad. They just, there was no really, they were just short runs. So we won't see any really big savings at that, except that it's new. Like the big sewer one it came out around the new box culvert out by, Sister's Restaurant. That was the big new sewer line. Next year, when they do the sewer project from 8th to 3rd, we'll see some savings in the I&I there, because we know there's some issues there in that old clay line and the manhole. So we'll see that. I think there was one water leak we knew that was in the area between 7th and 8th that they took care of when they put that new water line in there. So there was a few items that saved on resources doing that. But I think we'll see the bigger savings, especially for the wastewater facility next year when they do a large part of our sewer work.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Ann, do you have any questions?
All right, now the request for more money or potential. The Big Park lift station a couple weeks ago, it wasn't pumping. It was just bypassing inside the station. And so we had a guy come up. It was a Sunday. And we got it working. But what is happening, it's 30-some years old, like 32, 33 years old. And the metal faces where the pump connection hits the discharge elbow, those metal faces are just starting to wear out so bad that they can't make a seal. And actually, one of the pumps is down. We have one that's newer, but the 32-year-old pump is finally met its match. So actually, I just got a couple of quotes today for a new pump and repairing of the piping inside the station. The concrete structure itself is good. The control panel is, relatively new. It's just the bottom of the tank where these two metal flanges come together are so wore they can't make a seal, so it can't pump. And it's really critical because it's such a lift. It's a real high head, so you need heavy pumps, and they need to really bind. Otherwise, they'll push them around, and they once they start leaking, you can't really stop it. So, I mean, I can do it next meeting if you want. I can give you actually numbers or paperwork to look at if you want to know. The quote for the pump and the inside work is like $28,000. Plus, we have to help with our pumper truck to pump any wastewater before it gets to the lift station, because they'll be inside it, putting in new like 8-inch piping or 6-inch piping and elbows and stuff. So, and that's where we're at with that. I mean, it's a critical infrastructure. If it fails, like if it failed and we couldn't fix it last, I think it was mid-September, we would have to shut everything Highway 61 down south, Highway 61 and east of 8th Avenue West from like the park over to the Angry Trout we'd have to close them.
So is your intent then to still try to get that repair done this year, or is that something you would delay until next spring?
No, even the guy that came up and did our emergency repair, he said this would be pushed to the top of the list if they approve it to get it done this year. Because I mean, it's the Achilles heel. You need to have it done.
Yeah. So you'll be bringing us information when at our next meeting, or are you asking us to actually make a decision? And
well, I mean, if you want, I'd be nice if you could make a decision today. If you want to look at the paperwork, we can wait, I guess.
So you have to go out and get quotes on the pump. Is that the
I went to the one person that did the fixing of it. They've been working on all our big pumps. It's called Minnesota Pump Works. I only have one quote for a pump and the inside work. I haven't got any other quotes, and this one just came back today. So,
are we required to get two quotes, Mike? Or
We're not required, but we want to. One thing that would work is if you would give us authorization to spend up to $30,000 fixing it, then we'll go out and look for another quote and pick the one that makes the most sense.
So
reasonable. Oh, motion made. Yeah, I think I'll second that. I do think that's reasonable considering the urgency of getting this done. And we know what we dealt with, last year when we had the emergency work done before winter, and it's always good to get it done before the crisis presents itself. So
yeah, the temporary piping on that one a couple of years ago was astronomically high for the temporary, pumping of that lift station. Hopefully this will avoid all that, and we can still make everything work. So,
yeah. Any comments, Ann?
nope, sounds good to me.
All right, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Ann votes aye. I vote aye, Kim. Motion passes. So you guys can go out, get that second quote, and get going on the project.
all right, thanks.
Anything else, Tom?
I think we did pretty good on smell this year, or no smell. I haven't heard much complaints.
And what do you attribute that to?
It was much better, I thought.
I think part of it was COVID, and part of it is because of different things coming in at different times. Our own source, our external source, G&G and stuff, and we just tried to keep, I think, better ahead of things when we could, and we didn't do as much decanting, but we still had a lot of breakdown of our biosolid. So we're just working with like the numbers, the loading aspect that we're carrying in the ditch and transferring to the digester, and it just seemed to work better. It worked okay for that anyway. So.
Good. Anything else you need to bring to us, Tom?
No, it's good time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have our rate study. Dave, I don't know if, I mean, it was sent out in our packet. We had an opportunity to take a look at that. I don't know if we could go through it in detail or if you just want to do a quick summary or how you want to do this, but yeah.
All right, thanks. Let me say that yeah, he doesn't care to listen to this. I know that. Let me do a quick summary because, quite frankly, you guys are in pretty good shape. And so, if you have any questions, then we could go back and discuss some things more at length. So I'm gonna share my screen here. So you should be able to see the cover of the report. So basically, this is the report, and it's a draft report. And the reason that it's still a draft report is we like to present to, in this case, the commission, in case you've got any comments or questions that we feel we need to go back and maybe make some changes to the report so that it fits your needs. So it's still a draft report. With the idea to just finalize it after the meeting today. And so we'll just see how the discussion goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a few high points in the report, particularly tables, and just talk a little bit about some of the assumptions that went into the report and the results that we have found. So I'm going to go into actually section 2 of the report. So section 2 of the report, the first step I'd do is an examination of the projected results for the utility under the assumption that the existing rates stay in place. The reason for doing this analysis is to measure the need for revenues. If existing rates are generating enough revenue, then that means at least you don't need, some sort of an overall percentage sort of rate increase. However, if this shows that, additional revenue is needed, then utilizing cost of service and other things, we kind of decide how to do that. So a couple of things that went into the analysis here. One is, so you folks had about a 2% rate increase at the beginning of this year on your electric rates. The other thing was that your wholesale provider, SIMPA, had about a 4% rate decrease. And obviously, purchase power is your largest expense. So what we've assumed relative to the study is that the SIMPA rates will not change over the 5-year projection, which was 2020 through 2024. And I've had numerous conversations with SIMPA folks over the last several months about lots of things. I know them well and I've worked with them often and have done a lot of work for some of their members. And I would say that rates staying the same is probably the highest they will be. I think there's even a possibility that they may have another rate reduction. That information isn't solid enough to act on it yet, but I think that based on my discussions with them, that I wouldn't expect to see any kind of a rate increase, certainly anytime soon. And they did the rate reduction, and folks like that, you don't do a rate reduction unless you think it's going to be sort of sustainable. The last thing you want to do is sort of reduce rates and then immediately soon thereafter increase them again. The second thing relative to the assumptions, and when you were talking about some of the earlier things in the meeting, the coronavirus issue came up, and Relative to sales, we're seeing a bit of a reduction in your sales during 2020 as compared to 2019, and would appear that it is probably, coronavirus related. Certainly not unusual. I've had many clients who are seeing changes in their sales. What's interesting is a lot of places are seeing reductions in sales to commercial and industrial type customers, but actually increases in sales to residential customers because everybody's stuck at home. And so, there's a real mix on the kind of impact that different kinds of utilities are seeing. So what we have modeled in the projections is that for 2020, your sales will be 10% less than they were in 2019. And then we've assumed they'll come back up to those 2019 levels for 2021 and beyond. But we haven't assumed, other than that 1 year reduction and then sort of back to normal, we haven't included any additional increase in sales going forward. So while doing that, and you can see here in this table how your 2019 retail sales were about 23.5 million kilowatt hours. For 2020, we've reduced that down to about 21.2 million. And then for 2021, we're back up to the same level as in 2019. And then we continue that going forward. So when we look at the operating results, so this is a summary of the results. And so our operating revenues are at the top, less our expenses. And you'll notice how the revenues, we're only showing about 2.8 million of revenues in 2020, and then it goes up to 3 million, and it stays the same because we have after coming back to normal sales and with no changes in rates, we're basically showing flat revenue going forward. And sort of the bottom line relative to the change in net position is that your results are pretty darn good. The combination of your small increase as well as the reduction from SIMPA, it basically shows that your bottom line stays pretty good. And what I want to do is there's an exhibit at the end of this section. Let me make this a little bigger. I want to highlight a couple of other additional assumptions in here. So we've left the revenues basically flat, the rates flat, and you have that reduction from SIMPA, but we've actually added a couple of items in the expenses too. You'll notice that salaries, see, we're about 220,000 in 19, about 227 in 20. They jump up to 284 in 2021. And so in talking with staff, there's an additional position that has not yet been filled. So we've added a hiring into the expenses. So you can see the increase here. This is salaries of 284 and the benefits go up to about 98.5. So we've increased both salaries and benefits to represent the hiring to fill the vacant position that you've got. The other thing is we've added in, you folks have a local climate action plan. And so in talking with staff, without saying specifically what it's for, starting next year, we've added a $50,000 expenditure, or I'll call it sort of generic climate action plan activities on behalf of the utility and on behalf of the city. So there's about, $150,000 more or less of increased expenses, some of which obviously is sort of eating up that reduction that you had in the wholesale power cost from SIMPA. But all things being equal, things are looking, sort of just fine relative to where you're at from a financial perspective. And what's really important, in particular for municipals, is looking at what happens with your cash reserves. So we actually have cash reserves building. At the beginning of this year, it was about 841,000, which equaled about 38% of your operating revenue, where we get at the end of this year, which is just over $1 million. So the other really nice thing you've got happening here is that you've got some debt that is expiring. You'll notice that there's a $500,000 principal payment in 2023, which is the last principal payment associated with the debt for the electric system. So that really helps, things improve again out in 2024, because now we've got, still a positive margin on the utility, and we add in the depreciation expense because that's in the operating results, but it's a non-cash expenditure. And then you no longer have these principal payments. So what happens is we're essentially doubling your cash reserves from about 840,000 to about 1.6, almost 1.7 million. Now, while doubling cash may sound like, wow, that's, maybe we got a little bit too much money. But actually, for a utility your size, when measuring cash reserves against revenues, I would generally recommend something at least 50% of revenue in reserves. You're not, let's face it, you're not a particularly, big utility in the world of electric utilities. And there's always things that can happen. Things like, and this one's a new one that I had to have the list, things like pandemics, where all of a sudden sales reduce, but necessarily, especially local expenses, don't. Things like storms, ice storms, tornadoes, blizzards, things like that, that all of a sudden you have a need for cash to make repairs to a system where something has happened, and if nothing else, even if you're insured, it may take a while to secure those dollars. Unexpected capital improvements, or even capital improvements that you want to do to be able to sort of build up cash. So while we're building up cash, this 840,000 at the beginning of this year, from my point of view, is too little cash reserves for a utility your size. So we simply don't need additional revenue, and the fact that you're doing well is really a good thing to sort of strengthening your utility over the 5-year period. Maybe I should pause and see if there's any questions on this section.
I have a question, and as I was looking through the report, I think this is all really encouraging that we are in sound financial status, and looks like it's going to get even better. And my question has to do with kind of what happens in 2024. I mean, if we're seeing this growth in our reserves, and what happens after 2024? We don't need to continue to sock away additional reserves. We're that kind of threshold of where we need to be. I mean, and granted, we need to get to where we need to be, and we've spent some money on our public works facility and this Highway 61 project that have come out of cash that the public utility have set aside. So, obviously, it's not surprising that we're down a little bit in maybe our reserves. What happens?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that what you have to do is you always have to just sort of keep your eye on the bottom line and understand, what's going on relative to the utility financially, and having sort of guidelines relative to things like reserves, so that like, let's just say you make a policy that you want to maintain 50% of operating revenue in reserves. What you can do is, then if you start to exceed that, now you start to look forward and think in terms of, okay, what's going on with our sales? What's going on with our expenses, particularly wholesale power? And, and what's going on with our need for dollars for things like capital improvements? And ultimately, doing a rate reduction at some point, who wouldn't love to do a rate reduction? I mean, much in the way that SIMPA did a rate reduction for all of its members, under the understanding that they would probably be able to maintain that for some period of time, I would suggest that you would want to do the same thing, is that if it looks like, especially once your debt is gone, and if you don't look like you're going to incur any more debt, you might actually consider doing a rate reduction if you look at 3-4 years and where you're just sort of stockpiling too much money, then actually you should reduce rates. But I wouldn't plan on that yet because, you know, crystal balls are crystal balls, and, you know, life has changed a lot in the last 4 years. You know, 4 years ago, we would never expected a 4% rate decrease from SUMPA, but you got one. And so I would sort of wait to see, but it's always good to have policies on where you think you should be, and make sure you're just being vigilant in looking at the bottom line.
I think it's also important to remember some of the assumptions this is based on that he described right away. The first one that comes to mind being that our sales next year are going to return to pre-COVID levels. And we don't know if that's true. And it could be that the reduction in electricity sales is a multi-year phenomenon that we want to deal with. So I think looking ahead to 2024, it feels really good, like we're going to have a lot of options, but I think we need to wait a couple more years just to let some of those options play out before we make decisions about rate reductions. But it's nice to know that even with some of that risk, we're not looking at a rate increase right now, that we're going to be able to replenish our reserves without one.
You know, and one of the difficult realities of reduced sales is that it has almost no impact on local operating expenses. Obviously, your SIMPA bill goes down because you're buying less, but the vast majority of your local expenses are quite frankly fixed. They just don't vary. You know, local expenses just don't vary that much based on the amount of sales that you have, because it's mostly personnel related. And, you know, you don't hire and fire people based on the amount of kilowatt hours, you know, varying by a few percent one way or the other. So, you know, you just got to make sure to keep your eye on the bottom line. And at some point, you don't want to be in an embarrassing situation where somebody from the public says, "Why in the world do you guys stockpiling so darn much cash?" So, but you're not anywhere near that threshold currently.
Yeah, and I think I understand this, and you know, we want to increase our cash reserves to make sure we have adequate, you know, funding available there, and also recognize that these are best estimates based on a lot of different variables, and knowing that we're not perfect at that kind of forecasting. We want to make sure we're being conservative enough that we're not caught off guard and finding out that we're going to maintain the 10% reduction in power sales for next year, even the year beyond. So, you know, I would hope that, you know, we all understand that this is the best estimates that we come up with, and they still paint a good scenario. But things could take a turn for the worse, and maybe we might not get to that point. And, you know, I'm not suggesting just because this scenario that we consider rate decrease at this time, because I think that's a little premature. But, you know, as we get out into 2022, 2023, you know, I think we'll have a better idea of, you know, where we stand with at least the forecast that is made here, and that might give us opportunities to reevaluate. But for today, I mean, I think this to me feels like a solid position to be in, and understand that you know, we have to kind of get back to where we were, and our costs are still going to be there, and, you know, rates probably are not going to change based on that.
Well, on early day, if it's any consolation, I met with another utility who needs 5% rate increases each of the next 4 years at a minimum. So you're doing, you know, from a rate perspective, you're in much better shape than they are.
Good news.
The next thing is what we call the cost of service study. Now, the idea around the cost of service study is to look at different groups of customers and examine the estimated cost to serve them compared to the revenues that we get from them. Now, I will say that you folks are relatively unique in that you literally charge everybody the same rate. The only difference is the customer charge. The single-phase customers have a one monthly customer charge, and the three-phase have a different one. But everybody's paying the same energy rate. Now, what's interesting is that based on the cost of service analysis, I'm going to sort of jump to the answer on that. So this is the answer that so what we've done is I've got residential, then we broke commercial into small commercial and large commercial. This large commercial group is your 8 largest customers. So you don't actually have a per se small and large commercial group, but we created them relative to the cost of service analysis. So these 8 biggest customers we analyzed separately. Obviously, all of these large commercial pay the three-phase customer charge, and some of the small commercial do, and the majority of the remaining of them pay the single phase, which is the same rate as residential. I'm going to have to tell you that I was a little surprised that, so when you look at these numbers in the far right column, what this says is that to get the allocated cost to serve, so like 42% of the cost of the utility is due to residential customers. To get that to equal the amount of revenues we get, it says residential should get a 2% reduction, small commercial a 2% increase, and large commercial essentially stay where they are. Now, cost of service analysis is not a perfect analysis. There are some assumptions that have to be made, and there's, you can change some assumptions and move these numbers around a little bit. And my rule of thumb, and I've actually been doing this for 35 years, so is that anything within about 5% in that far right column is pretty good. So even though you literally charge everybody the same rate, I'm not suggesting that there's any cost of service balance that needs to be done either. In other words, you're kind of getting the right amount of revenues from each of the groups. However, the fact that you charge everybody based on energy only, plus the customer charge, is a tad bit unique in the industry. Most utilities, at least for their larger customers, just like the bill that you get from SIMPA includes a demand charge for your maximum amount during the month, during some hour, and an energy charge for your total kilowatt hours over the course of the month. Most utilities bill their larger customers based on that kind of a rate structure as well, with a demand rate and an energy rate. Now, I've actually put together, you didn't get this graph, but I put together a little bit of an analysis in the report, and I've got a graph to show you. So within section 4, in the discussion about large commercial, and I have a discussion in there about load factor. So right now for large commercial folks, you charge them $47.73, a monthly fixed customer charge, and then that 10.37 cents per kilowatt hour, which is what you bill everybody for energy. What I'm suggesting is that, and this rate is not, let me say, perfectly designed as yet, because Hayden and I have been having some discussions about what the demands are for these 8 large customers, and we're still getting some data on that. So I've made some assumptions, but what we would do is have a monthly demand charge where each month, based on their maximum hour during the month, they pay a demand charge, and then with an energy charge that's obviously lower than the 10 cents, it's about 8 cents. Now, why would we do that? And so, because we do energy only, I've got, these are mythical customers. These aren't actually represent customers for your utility, but I've got customer 1 with 25,000 kilowatt hours and customer 2 with 25,000 kilowatt hours. Now, when we mention something called load factor is a representation of the amount of energy compared to the demand on a system. So let me show you a graph that I put together here. All right, so there's red lines. Can you see this graph? Yes? Okay. So there's red lines and black lines on this graph. Now, this represents those two mythical customers. And they both use 25,000 kilowatt hours in a month. The red customer, however, has a maximum demand of 100 kW at various times during the month. Whereas the black line customer, their maximum demand is only 50%. They hit it like here and here, and so a few times. So they have different load factors. Now, when you look at, let's just take the local system. You have to build substations and distribution lines, and the transformers that serve customers and so on are all based on the maximum need. They're not based on the amount of energy, they're based on the maximum amount of kilowatts. So what happens is, for the black line customer, you need 50 kilowatts of fixed system to serve them, because that's their maximum take at any given time over the course of the year. Whereas for the red customer, you need twice as much fixed system, twice as much substation capacity, twice as much distribution feeder, twice as much transformation to serve them at their facility. So the average cost to serve them on a per kilowatt hour basis is higher because you've got twice as much demand cost spread over the same amount of energy. You get a demand bill from SIMPA, the red line needs twice as much wholesale demand as the black line, same amount of energy. Now, the reason that we have these kinds of rates for larger customers and not, let's say, for residential is that residential customers don't see big swings of differential and load factor. All residential customers, whether they're 300 kilowatt hours or 1,000 kilowatt hours or 1,500 kilowatt hours, the demand that they put is relatively proportional to their energy. And so we can kind of get away on a cost basis by having an energy-only rate. But let me go back to but see, when we look at load factor, what load factor is, it's the amount of energy, so 25,000 kilowatt hours, divided by the maximum demand, which in customer one is 50 kilowatts, times the number of hours in a month, which is 730. So you've got basically how much energy they use divided by how much energy they use if they have the maximum demand during all hours of the month. So the higher your load factor, the more efficiently you're utilizing the system. If you take it to extreme in a month, there's 730 hours in a typical month. You can have one customer that used 1 kilowatt every hour, and it's 730 kilowatt hours. You can have another customer who only was on for 1 hour and had a 730 kilowatt demand, and then was off the rest of the time. Both of them are 730 kilowatt hours. The first example, you only need 1 kilowatt of fixed system. The second one, you need 730 kilowatts. Now, that's 100% load factor versus a less than 1% load factor. So they're extreme examples. But this is why in the industry, this kind of a rate is more prevalent. Like 98% of utilities, I would guess, at least.
Let me know when we can ask a question.
Yes, right now would be good.
Okay, so could you, obviously, no need to name customer names or anything, but could you give an example of like a higher monthly load factor kind of business and a lower one? So that, because I'm just wondering how much control the customers have over when they do this.
Yes. Okay, well, examples oftentimes, especially in a situation like yours of higher load factor, is like grocery stores, okay? Because grocery stores have a lot of temperature control, freezers and refrigeration and things like that are operating all the time. They've got lights, because a lot of times of 24-hour operation, they've got lights that are on all the time. Okay. Something that might not have nearly as high of a load factor is things like, let's say, a restaurant that's only open for 10 hours a day. So during 10 hours, they've got all their stuff on, their fryers and their grills and so on and so forth. But then all that stuff gets shut off at night. So they set this demand during the day, but then overnight, yeah, maybe they have a freezer and a fridge running, but and they probably turn their climate control down because don't need as much going on at night. Or like gas station / convenience stores sometimes, because those pumps will put a demand on the system when people are pumping gas, but then when they're not pumping gas, which is actually a fair amount of the time, they're not so much. So those are some of the ideas around. And so on a per kilowatt hour basis, it's much cheaper to serve the high load factor than the lower load factor. Now, we're looking at 8 customers, okay? And so, and Hayden is working through because you actually do measure their demands. So we're just trying to make sure that we get the right numbers. And so what I will do is come up with a rate based on the new numbers, and we'll actually be able to look at each of those customers to know the impact that it would have on them individually. And some of them, their bills would go up, and some of them, their bills will go down. That's just the reality of the situation. And ultimately then, some of them can do something about that, because you start explaining to them what it means is like, well, maybe if we didn't run these 2 compressors at the same time, but if we ran them at different times, if they don't run very often, there are things that some customers can do to manage to bring their demand down. And there are other things that some customers simply can't do. But you're very, very rare in your rate design that you're charging energy only to these larger customers.
Okay, thanks. That really helped. I guess I was just kind of projecting ahead, thinking, well, if we change this structure, how will people feel like they have any control over being able to deal with it if their bills are going to go up?
Right. And there are things that some customers can do to bring their demands down. And that's the idea around the rate structure as well, is to send a signal to them. Because if they bring their demands down, that also helps you on your bill from SIMPA.
Yeah, I want to jump in.
Portion of your SIMPA bill is demand related. Go ahead, Mike.
That reiterate that point. About 1/3 of our bill is just our peak demand for a month, and so whether or not somebody can do anything about it, it still affects the bottom line for us. And it's something, like you said, because most utilities recognize that with a rate, even though there will be winners and losers. We should remember there's currently winners and losers, like those folks that are having those peaks and they're spread out are costing us money, and us is all the rest of the customers.
Sure.
And the other thing I want to say is we actually have another meeting at 4 that we have to get to.
Oh.
So
Right.
I think
Well,
maybe
that's all I have to say, Mike. So
we've got time for a couple more questions if you've got them.
What is the expectation with this, Mike, with regarding the rate study? Are we looking at, it's a draft and it's going to be adopted or accepted, or how is that going to go forward?
Yeah, we're going to ask you to adopt it. I think we'll wait until next meeting to do that. We just wanted to, first of all, make sure everybody had a chance to go through it with Dave and understand what it was saying, and that there weren't any real big issues that you wanted to see addressed. So you like the assumptions we're using, you like the things we built into the budget on an ongoing basis. Next month, we'll also look at the water and sewer budgets, and then I think we'll ask you to adopt this and then set the rates.
Yeah, the one thing I would suggest is that when we start to look at this, this load factor issue, is that we try to take that cost. Because if we're only talking about eight businesses, I think that the question is, can we do a good educational program to let those businesses be aware of what it is that we're thinking about doing, and whether it happens this year or next year, when it might happen, I mean, I think it's a good idea to let businesses know that we're thinking about this and that those load issues are, affecting all the customers of the utilities, and that we need to address that. But I think it should come with an educational component that lets those businesses be able to respond or react if they don't have any ability to do that.
With just 8 of them, what I'd recommend, we're not in a hurry to get these rates changed at that level. We want to gather a little more data about their load before we start deciding what we want that demand rate to look like. And then we can actually just run concurrent, like shadow billing, existing bill versus what it would look like with a demand bill for a number of months with customers while we're working with them to figure out ways that they can address that.
That's a great idea.
Well, go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, I just think that's a great idea so people know what to expect.
All right, well, we lost Tim, so I guess the other piece I was going to say was just that my plan is I will. Oh, he's back. So my plan is I'm going to just finalize this report basically as is. I don't think you actually need me at the next meeting, but if you want me, you can. And I had already told Hayden that I'll work with him going forward once we have the good billing data on these customers and to sort of finalize that rate and help with that. And that won't cost you any additional money. I told him basically for a period of time, you're still under warranty. So that will all be part of, the fixed fee that you're paying me. So once we have the good billing information, I will help to put together the analysis kind of on winners and losers. And I think, Mike's plan is as good as I could recommend.
Okay.
Jim, you're mute. Jim, you're still muted. You're still muted. There you go.
Yes, okay. Let's just end this meeting. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. We're kind of short. Yes. Anything else for anybody else?
No.
Thanks, Dave.
We are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you all.
Tim.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.